conference, this series of conferences began with that specific purpose. And it's been through three of them earlier, this is the fourth one. And I think this is very important in the present juncture, when we have both the problems of how to revitalize and reinvigorate the economic development in Kerala, in which ways and manners that this can be done, and also in terms of which is the political leadership which will be able to deliver what is possible in this present situation. And that is where I think, if you look at it, I basically have 2 points to make here. One is that in terms of the economic development for the people of Kerala and for Kerala itself, the alternatives that exist today, the potential that exists today, the need to have a political force, a leadership to the state government that is committed to implement these alternatives is very important. And that is why at this juncture, there's a very detailed analysis in the paper that has been here circulated for all of us to discuss for the next 2 days. All these issues are highlighted in that paper. I'm sure our discussions, your discussions, will be very useful in coming to some conclusions. But the final analysis, the point is to put them into practice. We've had this Kerala Congress in 1994 when this began. The 1996 LDF government was the one that initiated the People's Campaign Program and the People's Planning process. Unfortunately, it was aborted by the UDF government that followed. And even today, the UDF government that is there is actually undermining that very pioneering work in terms of not merely democratic decentralization, but economic decentralization that People's Planning process had. The need is to revive that. You're clear in the state that the LDF pioneered it, the UDF sabotaged it. So the political options that are there before the people of Kerala, that if you want to carry this forward, what is the political leadership for the state government that is necessary? Similarly, you had the experience of the UDF government, mired in the enlarging the shares of, or the spoils of office, as they call it, or the squabbles on whose share should be how much of these spoils of office. But the actual real problems facing Kerala. Yes, Kerala had even during the period of neoliberalism, even during the period of the global economic crisis, had shown a sense of resilience in withstanding these global economic shocks and continuing with this paradigm, with this trajectory of high economic growth. Even the current economic advisor, chief economic advisor to this BJP government, to PM Modi, he is on record of having actually analyzed the state that Kerala is actually an exception to this rule, and says that during the crisis, this is what he says, Kerala has exhibited a great resilience during the crisis, experienced virtually no decline. Now, this comes from even the votaries of neoliberalism who actually recognize this. But why is this? What is this resilience in Kerala? This resilience is implementing policies that are people-oriented. You had a period of very, very severe economic problems in Kerala. You are now, despite all this record, you are now at a stage where both agriculture and industry are stagnating. You had the last LDF government, which had a phenomenal recovery of the public sector undertakings. Starting from some nearly 300 crores of losses, it went up to some 650 crores of profits, which has now come down again under the UDF government. So it is possible to revive some industry in Kerala. But again, it comes down to the political leadership. So therefore, the 5 points that have been given in your note that is being discussed here, this 5 points, in order to implement, my basic point is, in order to implement, you require a political leadership of the state government. And that is important. And the other reason why a political leadership is important is actually the main point that I would like to stress on. And that is that Kerala could succeed so far, whether you call it the model or whatever you call it, the Kerala could succeed so far in generating this socio-economic indices and the human development indices because the state had a relative autonomy, though not proper autonomy, but a relative autonomy from the initial years of your independence till for much part of those decades that Comrade EMS was talking about, where you could decide on the trajectory that was most suitable for the people of Kerala. And this relative autonomy is what permitted Kerala to register this Kerala model. In today's conditions today, this relative autonomy, however limited it was even in the past, that relative autonomy is getting more and more restricted and constricted. One of the first things that this Modi government did was to abolish the Planning Commission. Now, abolishing the Planning Commission is not merely a nomenclature abolition. The Planning Commission was entrusted with the task of formulating the 5-year plans, of implementing the 5-year plans. And along with the Planning Commission, you had a very important institutional mechanism called the National Development Council that involved the central government, the state governments, various others in formulating the plan process and in determining the manner in which central planned finances flow to the states. Now that has been abolished by this government and Prime Minister Modi. Now where and how does the state articulate its arguments of what it requires in terms of resources, resource allocations, in terms of improving its own people's livelihood conditions? So the abolition of the Planning Commission and replacing it with this Niti Aayog is not the replacement of merely a name. It is the replacement of entire process of the involvement of the democratically elected state governments in the process of formulating the economic 5-year plans for the country, and most importantly, in determining the manner in which the central planned finances will flow to the states. Now this abolition means that Kerala can very well argue, not only Kerala, any other state in the country, can very well say that this is what you need, but then there's no body where you can insist on saying that for the needs of Kerala, we'll require to argue our case. That doesn't exist anymore. Instead, what is being tom-tom today? You hear your finance minister once again. Yesterday he made a very atrocious statement, saying that the revenue deficit, the two states that have the highest revenue deficit in India currently, West Bengal and Kerala, and both of them have one in common, that is the left legacy. Now, anybody worth his salt will tell you revenue deficit is an annual exercise. The last 4 years, you had a UDF government here and a Trinamool Congress government there. But anyway, I mean, the finance minister is a good lawyer maybe, but not an economist or an accountant to understand that these are niceties. But the whole point is the attack on the left. Under any pretext comes why? Because they see the left and the LDF, because this fourth version of this international Congress is titled for a left alternative in India. A left alternative in India is not possible without a left alternative in Kerala to begin with. That's how the left alternative in terms of the Kerala model, that's how it began in the country. Now, by stifling the state of Kerala from implementing what needs to be implemented for its own development and for the people's needs. The argument that is given is that we are adhering to the 14th Pay Commission, which has enlarged the state share of the central funds, and therefore we are giving more to the states. Now, this is a blatant untruth. What has been given to the states is a mere transfer of all the centrally sponsored schemes into the states' funds according to their quotas or allocations, and by then increasing the quantum to say that the states' finances have increased. And Professor Prabhat Patnaik has calculated and he's shown, I'll just quote, because this needs to be busted, this sort of a myth that is being spread, that this BJP government has ensured greater transfer of funds to the states. Now, what is the reality? That the total transfers from the centre to the states as a proportion of the GDP, which was 6.4% in 2010-11, fell to 6.1% in 2011-12. Then to 5.8% in 2012 and 13, 5.6% in 2013 and 14, and 5.4% in 2014 and 15. This is the revised estimates of the budget, and this time's budget estimate itself is 6.1%, and in final analysis, as Prabhat argues, it's going to be much less than that. So what we see is actually a decline in the total transfers from the centers to the states. But this is being propagated as though the states are being given more. And since this BJP government came, the resources transfer to the states is much larger. But that's not the case. This is the reality. Now, if this is the reality, the forum where these issues could be raised no longer exists. And therefore, the need that arises now is to take up this issue of a fundamental issue. That is an issue which is the fundamental feature of our constitution concerning federalism, on the state rights vis-a-vis this entire governmental structures. Center-state relations has assumed a newer dimension under this BJP government and Modi government today. And this is, of course, not only Kerala, all other states. Unless they take up this fight with the central government to ensure an equitable or proper transfer of resources to the states, in no model or no set of policies that you may decide for implementation in Kerala would be possible unless this struggle succeeds in forcing the central government to part with this finances. So it's eventually therefore a political matter of how we are able to struggle to ensure that the states get their legitimate rights. There's another example you see. The last session of Parliament, all over the country, the media reports were all focused on the fact of what? Will this Parliament session pass the goods and services tax, the GST, or not? You had a whole hype that has been built up by corporate India, saying not passing GST is what is causing a decline in our economy. That the GST automatically will increase our GDP itself is another fallacy. That the economists will be able to explain to you better than I can. But leave that question apart. What was the objection that we and the left had raised and continue to raise even this time, in this session, on which the BJP government, the Modi government has refused to talk to the opposition parties? They may be talking with the Congress. On the economic policies, we've always maintained that there's very little difference between the BJP and the Congress. But on this issue, not a single all-party meeting was ever convened by this government during the last 1.5 years. And what is that issue? The only right that any state government has to raise resources, that is through the state's sale tax and other methods, within the constitutional framework of our constitution today, that right today is removed with the GST. Yes, that right was undermined partially when the VAT came, but with the GST, that right is completely removed. Lots of negotiations took place with the state governments. Some formally were arrived at. We moved amendments in the parliament for that, but they are not accepted, and therefore that GST is not able to go through the parliament. But it raises a very serious question. Are the states in India to be denied of any independent autonomous rights to raise resources? And therefore what do? Or what happens? The states will become, they'll have to survive, the states, only at the mercy of the central government. The central government will dole out what it requires, and such doling out is often, not maybe often, but it's always on the basis of political considerations. Now this centralization of authority that is taking place, abolition of the planning commission, this methodology that is being used where the transfer of funds from the central plan finances does not happen, or there is no say for the states in how that transfer will happen, and these economic new legislations like the GST all converge to ensure that the states are reduced as mere receivers of the mercy of the central government. And that is where whatever laudable plans that we all may work out for Kerala and its future in the coming 5 years, all that will be crucially dependent upon the availability of such resources, which are under severe constraint today, and the reins are being held by the central government. And this sort of centralization is what? Both would want, both meaning neoliberalism on the one hand and the communal agenda on the other. A centralized unitary state structure in India is what neoliberalism requires in order to push through the reforms, economic reform process under the leadership of international finance capital, without any resistance from any of the state governments, and entirely keep it under the purview of the central government. The entire Modi campaign, various estimates exist. Some say something to the tune of more than 10,000 crores was spent on the advertisement campaign, funded by the corporates of India, for Modi as PM campaign. Now all this was not without a purpose. The purpose was that such economic centralization and such reforms which will enable international capital and domestic capital to maximize its profits. Now a unitary state structure, a centralized state structure is necessary for this process to move ahead without any roadblocks. Now this is what to which a need that this government is actually seeking to fulfill. The other, the communal agenda. What is the essence of that communal agenda? To convert a secular democratic republic of India, convert that character into the RSS vision of a Hindu Rashtra. That conversion again requires a centralized authority in the center, a unitary state structure. Both these converge today. Like patronizing communal polarization and promoting aggressively the neoliberal economic reforms agenda, converge under this Modi government. Both these aspects converge today to ensure that the state's rights are further restricted. So what is required, and that is the alternative Kerala will have to show. We are talking of the left alternative. That alternative Kerala will have to show that the political leadership of the state government in Kerala would be one that is responsive to the people's needs, which are all the things that are contained in what Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan just spoke outlining, and all the aspects that are contained in the note that you will discuss. That a determination to implement such alternative economic policy direction and trajectory, and to take on the central government's efforts to impose this sort of a unitary state structure in our country and to uphold the federal content of the Indian Constitution and ensure the rights of the states and your legitimate share of the central planned finances. Now becomes a crucial issue if you want any left alternative to be on the agenda of India. And that is why, while we discuss the economic policy issues, while we discuss the question of IT, information technology's future in Kerala, biotechnology, you discuss Gulf repatriates, yes, all of those are correct. But all of that can succeed only when the Kerala government is able to marshal sufficient resources. And those resources can come, the big part of those resources that come through your planned finances are today the ones that are under attack and virtually under denial. This needs to be fought. That is why, for us Marxists, not only for us, but the actual reality, it's not only pure economics. It can never be. You have the pundits of neoliberalism and this government, including the finance minister, who keeps talking of depoliticizing the economy. That is, you may have your ideological positions, you may have your positions, but as far as the economic policy is concerned, keep politics away. But these reforms themselves are because of a certain politics. Neoliberalism could not have been so aggressive in the world but for the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist countervailing power. Today, the international finance capital could not have arisen to the question of seeking the hegemony over neoliberal economic policy trajectory in the whole world, but for the conducive political conjuncture it found with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the world that began developing after that. Likewise in India, the politics of communalism today dictates a unitary state structure. The politics of neoliberalism dictates the restriction of the state's rights. So within this political economy, Kerala to rise to implement an alternative left model in the state and contribute to the country's alternative left model will mean rising in resistance to these unitary measures or unitary structure thrusts that this central government is making. So therefore, finally, what does it mean then? Whether to implement your alternative policies that you I must say, I must congratulate the AKG Center for bringing out such a detailed analysis of Kerala economy and what needs to be done. In order to implement that, you require an LDF government in Kerala. In order to ensure that the struggle against the central's unitary offensive and to take away whatever little autonomy that the state governments may have to decide on their developmental trajectory, that has to be resisted, and for that there is no alternative in Kerala but to have an LDF government. So therefore, on both these counts today, if the objective that you set out for yourself at this 4th International Congress is to be achieved, if the objective is to take Kerala to a higher level of developmental trajectory and to maintain its own unique social composition from being disrupted, then this is the only political alternative through which this political economy can be implemented. Remember, your own study paper shows that one of the things that have grown, and this is an alarming fact, that has grown in Kerala during the past, under this UDF government and in the past trajectory of economic policies, is your growing inequalities. These socio-economic inequalities that have widened not only need to be narrowed for humanitarian considerations, which are very important, they must be narrowed, but they need to be narrowed also for the sake of not being vulnerable for exploitation by communal forces. You see that offensive today in Kerala. That offensive has to be resisted. And therefore, finally, in terms of political economy, a left alternative in India that crucially depends on a left alternative in Kerala, which has always depended since our independence. And that alternative in Kerala can only come when we, as people, respond to this challenge of this political economy that exists today. And that is why you require a political leadership in the state that is able to take up both these twin challenges, an economic policy direction change and the resistance to this centralization of authority and financial powers by the central government and the evolution of a unitary state structure. And I can only hope and be confident that after the rich analysis that will follow after this inaugural session, that this Congress will be able to crystallize these thoughts into a program of action and present it before the people of Kerala so that we have a determined political leadership in the state that will be able to take up these challenges, which in my opinion are very, very important for the future not only of Kerala and its people, but for the future of India as we know of it today. Thank you.